Hello, folks. Welcome back to Unmuted Love, where we talk about the messy things, the beautiful things, and the brain-based reality of raising kids who didn't get the soft start we wish they had. I'm C. Eshelman, attachment and trauma therapist, and I'm your intrepid host, as you know. Today, we're talking about something almost every parent of a trauma-impacted teen knows all too well. Here it comes, anxiety. Specifically, anxiety that doesn't look like anxiety. So it could look like something, I don't know, rage, shutdown, refusal, control. And we parents are left wondering, is this anxiety, trauma, hormones, all the above? So to answer these questions, I'm sitting down today with someone who's lived on both sides of this conversation, personally and professionally. Emma Gleadhill is a former deputy head of one of the most prestigious private day schools in England, one of the youngest to ever hold that job. Kind of precocious, aren't you?
Yeah. There's a story behind that too.
I'll bet. So everybody get a cup of tea, take a breath, relax your shoulders, and we'll talk anxiety because we don't want to be anxious while we're talking about anxiety, right? Okay. Emma, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So happy to talk about this topic because it's so on front of mind for most of the parents who are listening to our podcast today. You've spent many years supporting young people through some of the most emotionally intense phases of development. And to help ground our listeners, let's just talk a little bit about what makes the adolescent phase itself such fertile ground for anxiety.
I mean, basically, our systems, we're kind of feeding creatures who think. And our systems, our brains, our bodies, our nervous systems don't like change. Basically, adolescence is totally all about massive change, physical change, change in the brain, hormonal change. It's all going on. And in a way, they've sort of emerged from the fraughtness of infancy. You may have had a bit of a quiet patch in my psychotherapy training. I'm not a psychotherapist, but I did a master's in psychotherapy, child observation, and we call the period between sort of roughly 6 and adolescence, 11, 12, the latency period, which is when the brain is developing all sorts of other skills, but is less kind of emotionally labile, volatile. And of course, in adolescence, there's a kind of, it's preparing to part. All of these changes that are all happening really at the same time, physical change, starting to occupy a more feminine or masculine body, relationship changes, brain changes. We often expect and would like to see a real sort of steady line of development, but it's really not like that. It's sort of very up and down and up and down.
I think if you kind of a tornado, right? It's a tornado of
yeah. And revisiting stuff. And I think whether or not there's trauma in the background, it's always worth remembering. Adolescence is a time of change and uncertainty, a lot of growth and development, and with it come a hell of a lot of growing pains.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're trying to attach more deeply with peers, and at the same time, they kind of have an idea. They know what's going on. They're getting this new body. You know, they're sort of in that twilight zone. They're not quite a child and they're not quite an adult yet, but they can see that sort of parting on the horizon. You know, and if you take into account, for example, changes of caregiver over a child's life, early life experiences, for example, then you've also got anxieties about leaving. Beginnings and endings create anxiety anyway, but the fear of abandonment, felt experience that's held in the body, it's all coming up again. And it almost seems as though we like to think, well, we're in a happy place now. We brought this child up. We brought them through, you know, those fraught years of, you know, being small and vulnerable. And now they're looking quite sturdy, but actually in their inner life, things are quite vulnerable. And that's really important to remember.
You were saying, like, if you change caregivers, and I think you're referring to an adverse childhood experience of perhaps being adopted or moving into foster care for a various number of reasons, and then having a new carer come along. And and that is just a whole nother layer that adds to what's already a tornado, right? It's already a tornado of emotion and hormones and physical changes, and also anticipation, right, of growing up and becoming an adult. But on top of it, there is that trauma. And that trauma is invisible if this transition happened before, say, 3 years old for the child. It's invisible to them. And so what do you think happens when trauma is put on top of that tornado?
I think one of the big reframes that might be helpful for parents, particularly where you've got a child with that sort of background, is that you have to feel fundamentally like you can act out in order to, so there is a certain amount of good work that you have done. There's a secure enough base for them to be vile to you, to try and push you away and test out. Because the central question of adolescence is, do I fit in? Where do I belong? Am I loved? Who am I? And so there's a lot of pushback and counter will going on, and that can be quite excessive. In my childhood, I had interruptions in terms of my parents being present in my life. I became very hyper independent, and so you can get this sort of swerve towards almost obsessive autonomy and needing to push back all the time. Or I became uber, you joked about me being rather precocious. You become invulnerable, you become successful in other ways. I checked every box and I got ahead. But later in life, I've had to, do quite a lot of work to understand how to be vulnerable and how to get back into secure attachment. And secure attachment means you can be raw. You can be needy, and to know enough that you won't be too much, that your needs will be met, that you can speak to your needs. But that's a hard-won process. It takes quite a lot of time, particularly if there's been early attachment issues and trauma there. So, they need to be able to seek us when they're hurt. They need to go somewhere to show their biggest feelings when they're unsure. And they're unsure. So they will come to you and they will maybe be quite difficult with the way they express that. So the framework for you to maybe think about that could be more helpful is this, aggression, this dysregulation, this extreme behavior is a signal of a need to come back to a safe base. And how you interact with that as a parent, it can be an onslaught in people's childhood trajectory into and through adolescence without trauma, but with trauma, it becomes a little bit more likely.
So are you saying that aggression and refusal and opposition, perhaps looking things, pushback is what you said, that really needs to happen for teens to move on developmentally? Am I getting that right?
Yeah. Gabor Mate writes about it in a great book called Hold On to Your Kids. He talks about this sort of difficulty of navigating two drives that are at odds with each other. We have a drive for intimacy, coming together, and we have a drive for autonomy, being apart and being separate selves and differentiated. And that sort of swinging in and out of togetherness. I can be intimate, I can be vulnerable, and I can be separate, and becoming armored and almost having so much counter will that the pushing back and pushing away is too excessive. It's really difficult to move back. And so as a caregiver, when you've got that dynamic going on, really reminding yourself, trying to create scripts for what's going on that are not adding a persecutory layer. They're a bad person, or I'm a bad person, or this is part of a process. And your centeredness, your grounding, your reassurance, your love, even when they might be, screaming in your face, is actually the route back to them getting back into regulation. So if they are really fighting you hard and you rise back and you've both flipped your lids, mm-hmm. In terms of your nervous systems, you're both in fight, flight, you're both shouting at each other, you're maybe judging them or telling them that they're wrong. You've just got to go to school, for example, and you're not showing that you've got any bandwidth for actually coming on a level with them. What is it? Let's just slow this down. I can't hear you when you're shouting. Let's just take a pause here. That ability for you to master your triggers, slow your breath, physically and emotionally anchor yourself with that sense of purpose. This child is showing me that they need help at the moment.
Yes, thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm aware that most of the listeners here have been raising their children, and they have been having teenagers since the children came home to them. So this tornado we're talking about has been, not for all, but for many, alive and active for the whole childhood. And then we come into the teen years, and now they have agency in a way they haven't ever had before. Agency to leave the house if they want, to tell you no to your face if they want, and you have no recourse, right? There's nothing you can do. And some teenagers, even if you do try to manage them in any way, become aggressive and even violent and run away, refuse to do any of the things that we would consider ordinary family things, school, for example, or chores around the house, or even just going someplace together as a family. That tornado is so huge in adolescence that parents, they get here and they're like, what have I raised? I've raised a monster. I've raised a tyrant. What have I done? And what do I do now? Because now they feel completely out of control and completely dangerous even. So I'm now kind of throwing that at you like, oh, do you have the answer to this? um, because it's not so simple, right? As just let's slow this down. Not really, but maybe it is. Maybe it actually is that simple. So I'm happy to talk with you who works in this area specifically about that. Is it that simple? Or is that the only thing that you have in that moment?
I think you've got to take yourself into that dynamic and think, what can I do? What works? Where are the limits of my locus of control? I can't wrestle this teenager who is, I'm only quite a small woman, and if my daughter wanted to take me on, she'd have me straight away. Let me tell you, But there is, I think, that sort of sense of remembering you can do what you can do in that moment. If they're going to run, they're going to run. And you're going to need to think and have a kind of very sort of clear sense of protocols, because sometimes these behaviors are predictable. They're part of someone's way of dealing with conflict. Once their lid is flipped and they've bolted, if you fear for their safety, then yes, it's making the emergency call. It's getting the people who are, perhaps in your squad to be support to you, because this is weapons grade parenting. Mm-hmm. It's extra, and you can't do it all by yourself. That's why we do have emergency services. That's why we do have, a need to use the other resources, getting specialist help and advice, having a group of people who you trust, who are family, friends, or who are part of your network of people who you can talk to about what you're going through, and share strategies in that kind of community of people who get what you're living without judging you. There are various things you can do to manage your own mind, to try to be calm and calm yourself down. You can think about the scripts that you tell yourself when you're in this moment, and you can think about what's helpful to get you into that calmer state you need to be in, and what's not helpful. So, for example, say you're in a public space, in a public area, and your teenager or your child has suddenly started shouting in quite an abusive way. Straight away, there is that feeling of, God, I need this to stop. I need you to be quiet. I need, and then you're investing all your hopes in the least capable, mature person, because when we flipped our lid, whether we're 5 or 55, we are like 2-year-olds again. Yeah. And so you've got to think about the developmental age and the age, whether developmental age really applies in this moment. Right. With this scenario. So I wish I could come up with this kind of cookie cutter formula of you can do this, you could do that. But what I would say is, if you've had an accelerating and developing dynamic where things are getting higher risk, higher anxiety, and your safety perhaps, or the sibling's safety, or your partner's safety is coming into question, then it is time to get quite strategic and think about, okay, what are my protocols if there is a physically violent meltdown, or if there is a bolting, a running away? Who do I go to? What do I do? And sort of almost make it like not a screensaver on your phone, but a go-to reminder that you have, that takes, because obviously when you're in high anxiety dynamics, all your working memory collapses. Right. You
Take
can't
it back.
think clearly. So, you can do what you can do to make the process planned. You can't foresee everything. Of course you can't, because sometimes things unfold in unpredictable ways. But you can do what you can do to make sure you've got people who you can call on, remembering the emergency services also have a role to play in keeping people safe and, preventing people doing dangerous things where possible.
Yeah, unfortunately, those safety systems don't work so great for our families. And for the reasons that are probably obvious, but I'll just say them out loud, is that it happens so frequently. These things happen so frequently in homes, each home, that if you call those services enough, they know your name and then they stop
Mm.
coming and they throw up their hands and they say, we've tried everything, we don't know. And then now it's in law enforcement's hands. Law enforcement says, no, just, take them back in. It's all right. It'll be all right. In the meantime, parents are really suffering. But let me just sort of encapsulate that as that's the super high end dysregulation, super high end child who is unable to manage their emotions, and the relationship between the parent and the child has become strained, if not broken. So I'm going to put that up here as okay, that's the red zone family. And
Mhm.
like you said, we can't really tackle that like a cookie cutter. Like we can't actually tackle anything like a cookie cutter. But there are some things that we can do, and they not as a cookie cutter, but more as a plan or something to think through for yourself and how it might work with your family. I just want to say to parents who are in this red zone, I I see you. I know that what we're saying right here is almost a platitude for you because you have tried emergency services, you have tried safety plans, you have sent your children to inpatient, and you have sent them to juvenile hall for the things that they've done, perhaps because things have gotten worse and worse. And I feel that pain with you. I experienced that myself when I had children at home, teenagers at home, and I know the pain you're experiencing.
Mm.
So keep listening, keep coming back for support and love because we see you. And now, just for a second, I'm going to pivot though to maybe the yellow zone families who are maybe looking at anxiety, but they're calling it something else. They're calling it defiance or saying mean things, rude things, a form of recalcitrance. They're just not willing to cooperate in any way. How do we know, Emma, that that's perhaps anxiety and it's not just bad behavior? How do we tell that?
I'm very much aligned with that idea of behavior being a communication. And
Yeah.
wherever you've got a pattern of behavior, there is a communication being made. It's a non-violent communication, that movement, which sort of identifies behavior as being a communication that might be a skill that's not yet learned or a need that's not yet met. And again, that reframe, instead of looking at it as, this person is out of control. Those can be the sorts of stories and labels we put on a scenario in this sort of yellow zone. That is not necessarily a kind of helpful story to fix yourself in. So thinking about how what are the emotions that are coming up, being curious, trying to lean into their inner state of mind, being listened to. Now, of course, these interactions can be at immense speed. And I think it's really important when you're on the receiving end, for example, of aggression or edgy language, abusive behavior, perhaps, that you might find yourself in sort of within backup behaviors from the way you were parented by your parents. I would never have behaved to my parents like that. How dare you? And then there's a kind of rise of the tone of voice. There's judgment. There's, again, an edge of aggression coming back, when actually what we want to think about when we're working with trauma, anxiety, aggression is how we can communicate nervous system to nervous system, a communication of safety. So that kind of sense of how am I labeling this behavior? Because that matters. It will either add drama where no drama is needed to be added. Thinking about ways in which you can, if you say, this is just a bad kid, that sort of gives you a kind of helplessness formula. Here they are, and there you are, and you're sort of trapped in that narrative. So that's why the reframe of, what's this behavior telling me? And really remembering that anger is kind of the sweetest unpleasant emotion, isn't it? Yeah, we all love that kind of whoosh of energy, because it activates us to do something. But actually, it's a masking emotion, and beneath it lie a whole load of layers. And it's those layers that need attending to. And you ain't going to get there if you're caught in fact tennis or a shouting match where you're trying to out-dominate your child's aggression. Now I'm thinking about the work of Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory, working nervous system to nervous system.
Right. What is that?
Being
So
able,
we're talking about that at sort of the clinical level, but what does that mean? What does that mean? What are you doing when you're talking nervous system to nervous system? Let's get sort of like out of the theory and into the practice, because I hear you. I know what you're saying very well. And I've said it, of course, too, to folks. But then they're like, it's contagious. I feel exactly the same way as my kid, I think, in these moments. And I can't get out of that. And when you say nervous system to nervous system, what am I supposed to be doing? They're pushing me up against a wall. They're threatening. They're saying these things. And I'm just as upset as they are, but I'm supposed to calm them. How do I do that?
I mean, I think it's slowing into noticing the dance of this contagion of anxiety at as early a stage as possible. So that kind of sense of being able to slow your system, slow your breath. Obviously, if you're pinned up against a wall and your own safety is being compromised, that's a different situation altogether. I think you're allowed to, feel that natural survival instinct kick in at that point.
Right. It would be unnatural, right? To be the
It would
calm in
be.
the face of that. So no one can do that.
Yes. But I'm thinking about on the flight path to that moment,
That's right. What comes before?
what comes before it.
Mhm.
And when you notice that sort of temperature rising, being able to manage the temperature of the relationship in those earlier points, knowing what your triggers are, knowing what are the types of conversation that lead to these kind of rapid escalations, being able to recognize at an earlier point, what's being asked here, where is this going? For instance, being able to name it in some way, having a kind of shorthand metaphor for identifying, I think we're on this flight path. So, for example, I would think about being on an aeroplane and experiencing turbulence. We're going into choppy waters. When we are on a plane and there's turbulence, the pilot doesn't go, "Whoa, let's freak out, it's turbulent," right? Instead, it's like, bing bong, we're heading in for some turbulence. And the voice is very level. That sort of the voice of the pilot is level, factual, instructive, calm, measured. And it's kind of being able to access your inner pilot, to be able to regulate your tone of voice, particularly because once you start to experience your own whoosh, you're starting to feel that activation. Oh, we're in it, we're going there, to be able to really think about your tone of voice. And we all experience threat. We have a threat sensor in our middle ear that detects a predator. So, when you are in that whoosh, when you're in an anxious situation, your voice will tend to go harder, choppier, more staccato. Yeah. That sort of, don't you talk to me like that.
Right.
Stop it. And in a way, when we hear ourselves talk like that as well, it kind of revs us up even more inside. It's thinking about, how can I tamp down this stress contagion between us? And one of the things we can do, manage the breath, slow the breath, and make our tone of voice a little bit more musical. So it might be, okay, whoa, okay. We might have just a couple of syllables that we use in quite a musical way that kind of slow things down. Just go, okay, whoa, okay, tell me.
Mm-hmm. Shifting into
That's
curiosity, right, with your tone, rather than in shifting into control.
Yes, and children who've had those sort of changes of caregiver, and perhaps those changes of caregiver have been precipitated by that fostering, for instance, is triggered by being in an unsafe environment. So they've already learned the skill of hypervigilance to anticipate threat from your voice and from your face as well. So it is about thinking about relaxing, giving yourself some physical cues to calm your own nervous system and to send out signals of safety. We also show tension in our face, around our eyes and our jaw. So that kind of, soften the face, soften your eyes, soften your jaw. Whoa. Okay, sounds like we need to take a second here. Let's just sit down. Instead of sort of staying on your feet and, sort of on your toes and kind of getting into it in your tone of voice and your facial muscles kind of getting set, being able to just kind of give yourself a little bit of a wash down, because these things happen very quickly and they transfer. Teenagers, in any case, their amygdala looks for signs of social threat. They look for signs of social threat, of rejection, or of anger or aggression. Their brains don't work the same as an adult brain when faced with strong emotion. Research shows that they anticipate aggression and miss cues, for instance, of sadness even. So their reading of the room is not great. So you can maybe try and experiment with how that transfer of energy happens between you both, and finding ways in which you can experiment with ways of slowing things down. There's a reason why in cowboy films, when the horse is spooked, there's a kind of whoa. Yeah. It's musical, it's elongated, it's not that sort of sharp, your voice drops and the energy of your voice becomes quite urgent, and that accelerates that stress contagion. They don't hear your words, they hear your tone, they hear that energy, and they misread it as aggression, and therefore, their psyche, which is already on that flight path to being on fire, it's right on fire now, and their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for kind of relational agility, thinking creatively, problem solving, that's right offline.
Yes.
So whatever you're saying to them, words ain't going to do it. So lecturing them, telling them, just soothe that situation, slow things down one step at a time.
I'm hearing you, and I agree with you 100%. Also, I'm aware that it's very hard to depersonalize what's being said in that aggressive way to you when you're a parent. It's hard to not personalize it enough so that you could even think about what your child needs in that moment, right? In that moment of upset, you're in survival brain too, perhaps. It's very hard to think about the bear when you are afraid of the bear. And so this is something that takes practice, doesn't it, to I call it 1 foot in, 1 foot out, where one foot is in the situation so that you are connected, and 1 foot is out, where you are able to stand inside your own well-being and safety and adulthood so that you can see what's happening in a bigger way. Do you have a way of looking at that or doing that I'm not saying that maybe would also be helpful?
I don't know. I really like that sort of idea of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I think heaps of self-compassion are needed around this. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but, or even 50% of the time. Kudos to you if you get it right some of the time when you're in that kind of high octane fraught situation. There are some kind of go-to things that, I have found in my parenting coaching, working with families in this sort of situation, is thinking about how do people who work with very volatile situations, like, for example, in hostage negotiation, how do they create that connection across a very tense, revved up, hyper-volatile situation? And yes, there is this sort of slowing down, and mirroring is a thing that I think is very helpful to kind of have in your kind of go-to strategy. So, they say an emotion word, I'm just so angry right now, or, whatever, it might be it might be stronger than that.
Yes, it's
We
usually F you. Yeah. F
yeah,
you. No feeling words attached.
yeah. I get it. That kind of, again, I get it. And we can talk about what fuck you is.
Yeah.
You're taking the emotional grenade that they just set off, and the subtext of what you're doing is, I heard exactly what you said, and I'm not arguing with you, I'm tuning into you. Because fundamentally, we all want to be listened to. We all want to be heard. That is a really, really fundamental and important need. Experimenting with changing the dance, instead of sort of, I have to control you, I'm ready to listen to you. I get the FU, I'm here. Let's talk about what this FU is about.
Fundamentally, right, shifting out of traditional parental stance of I'm the adult and you're the child and you'll listen because that's what you need to do. And I'm going to talk to you and you're going to listen to me, versus shifting into a more collaborative process of I'm here to be with you, I'm for you, I'm leaning into what you're telling me. Yeah, you're saying things that I don't care for, at me, but I can see past that because I know you. I love you. I'm here for you, right? It's shifting into a different mindset altogether when you're working with children from difficult beginnings who have this kind of volatility when they're anxious.
You need to kind of humanize the situation, because they're not seeing you as you. They're seeing you as the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
You are this thing that is in their way. They're projecting a whole lot of stuff onto you in that moment. It's not you. So it may go against your personal values to be spoken to in that way, to be treated in an abusive way. But they're not they're not ready to step in with that value system just yet. Certainly not when their brain is completely offline and their survival limbic system is absolutely in full rage. They see you as something that they have to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing else matters.
Right. They're surviving
Whereas,
us, right? They're surviving us, the parent. Yeah.
so I think it's about humanizing the situation, humanizing them. And one of the good ways to do that, one of the ways in which people do try to build relationship across a really, really volatile, uncertain, critical situation, is that sort of slowing down, showing interest, listening. I mean, it's not like, yeah, I get that you're telling me to F off, but let's talk about how lovely your trainers are. That's not going to work.
No.
It's like,
Distraction.
yeah, it's not distraction or deflection. It's I can see something of what's going on for you here, and I want to understand it, and I want to work with you to understand it. So tell me what this FU is all about.
So, Emma, we have spent the last 30 minutes or so not saying much about anxiety, right? We're talking about reactivity, I think. And so let's see if we can hold these two realities, right? That underneath what we're looking at, right? What we're looking at may look like what we spent the last 30 minutes talking about: a lot of escalation, a lot of dysregulation, volatility, lability, all of those things. And on the other hand, underneath that is something else. And that's what you're saying, right? It's like, okay, what does that fuck you mean? What is that about? What are you feeling? A lot of children won't say how they feel, teens especially. They're like, I'm not telling you anything, because they feel so vulnerable, I think. I mean, is that anxiety under there? Anxiety of what? What is anxiety really? Let's talk about that for just a second. So, because we do live in this world we've been talking about just now, we're living in that hot pot all the time. But I think seeing it as anxiety is very hard for us. We can see it as a trauma reaction, but anxiety feels like a little bit of a different bird. So maybe we could talk about that just a bit.
I mean, I think Dan Siegel would talk about it as like your window of tolerance.
Right.
Stephen Porges would call it being outside of your zone of regulation.
Is that anxiety? So we are talking about anxiety But is that the definition of anxiety, as being outside your window of tolerance? Because I would call that dysregulation, and I wouldn't say anxiety. And so maybe I'm the one that's sort of missing the boat on that, And that's good, because if I'm missing the boat and I'm helping people learn this, I actually want to hear from you.
I mean,
Like,
I
what is
suppose
that?
I'm not a clinician,
No, no.
so I would say there's a kind of activation that comes with anxiety. Something is going on. It's a trigger for anxiety. It's something that pops up. It might be you see something on the pathway. It looks like a snake, and you are in overdrive.
Mhm.
It might be, you're going into school and, no one smiled at you. Someone seems to have looked at you out of the side of their eye.
Mhm.
And that's sent you into a kind of activation state where you are really funneling in on a threat. So our anxiety circuitry is a state of activation that detects threat, uncertainty, and it affects our bodies.
Mhm.
So there's a physiological response, which be, blood pumping. It could be a racing pulse, the face flushes, it might be tension in the hands or the feet. So there's a physiological reaction that comes with anxiety. Quite a lot of the time, for example, when I'm working with educators, they're looking out at their class and they're seeing someone who might be tapping their leg or, tapping their pencil, and it's really irritating. You're like, that's a sign of you not being on task. You're not focused. But actually, those sorts of fidgets are often about dispersing the stress hormone cortisol.
Mhm.
So there are physical things that happen when there's that anxious activation. It affects your mood. So your mood will take a hard turn into maybe catastrophization, for example. Particularly, for example, if you use that sort of sense of school refusal, for example, where fears are projected and really amplified. That catastrophization is a kind of psychological defense mechanism. It's a shield against potential hurt, potential rejection. There's anticipation of anxiety. Anxiety affects four things. It affects our physiology, it affects our mood, it affects the way we think. So our minds start racing and making false predictions. We're less in the moment. We're either in the past or fast forwarding into a catastrophic future. And of course, it affects our behavior. It affects our relationships and our behavior, because what we feel that we haven't named and processed, we're pushing out there into the world. You'll see that in physical gesture, the way the glass of water is put down on the table in your home will speak volumes as to where that person is in terms of their anxiety. And that threat anxiety circuitry has neural primacy. It comes first. It trumps being sat down and having, being logicked out of it. It is a bottom up feeling.
Right.
Rather, there's not a kind of conscious decision and thinking. It's like, this has happened. I can't bear it. I must da da da, whatever it is, I must avoid, I must, whatever the next phase of the cycle is. And everything is funneling around avoiding that thing happening.
Right. Parents listening may feel a little bit discouraged or overwhelmed by the intensity of their teens, what we're calling anxiety, but I think dysregulation, the things that trigger dysregulation, or the threat system. What's the hope? What is the core hope in this conversation for them? I think it's in regulation. I think it's in relationship. Right. My
Yeah.
thought is that it's really way before what we're talking about is sort of the big side, and it comes way before the big side, right? Where you live your life slower and more intentionally, so that you
Mm.
are actually connecting with the person in front of you, the child, the teen in front of you,
Yeah.
more of the time. And so they know day in and day out that you are for them, you're there for them,
Mm,
and that
mm.
they matter as much as you matter, as much as taking out the trash matters, as much as even going to school matters, that they matter. So it really comes all before this, right? The biggest escalation and dysregulation, that's about containment. It's about quieting right in the moment and sort of riding it out, right? For the cortisol to come out of the prefrontal cortex and for a reason to come back in if it does. And it might be a very long time. It could be hours or weeks even for some kids to come back
Yeah.
into their logical mind. But I think we're sort of talking about the end here when really we could be talking perhaps about the beginning and
Mm,
how to keep the teen years from being so volatile. Because while pushing back or saying no, or I don't want to do that, or I don't like doing that, is expected, it's not expected that all teens will be this dysregulated, right? It's the trauma on top of the teen years generally that kind of moves it into this very volatile state, which is why parenting from a place of relationship rather than compliance, I think,
mm.
probably is more the answer. What do you think?
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think often we bypass a child's need and drive for autonomy. We know best, we take the decisions, and that care can very quickly become like control. And I think that sort of graduating out of doing things for to doing things with and being very collaborative, not expecting to rule by authority, by judgment and, dictate how things should be, but very much in negotiation. And I think you made this wonderful point about what about hope? What, where's all this going? Basically, where there's been trauma and where there've been attachment wounds, there is an ultra need for rupture and repair to be navigated. We all need it. And actually, a quiet life is not necessarily getting to completion in a young person's development either. We expect there to be some gnarly bits of rupture and repair and tensions between that intimacy and autonomy. We don't want a kind of dishonest harmony.
Yes,
Basically,
absolutely.
when we think about attachment in its early stages, sort of infancy and adolescence are kind of like twin pairings. Adolescence, like the sequel of infancy, isn't it? It's like, yeah, infancy part two. Um, and Bowlby, who was like the granddaddy of attachment theory, talked about secure attachment involving proximity seeking and emotional openness. Emotional openness. That means being in touch with and expressive of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
And the ability to use the caregiver as that sort of safe base where they can actually check out those feelings. That's not to say we've got to be the punch bag of it all, but it's helpful to kind of see it in those terms. They need a lot more in terms of navigating rupture and repair, and getting really good at the repair bit is the thing that, one interaction, one dreadful interaction at a time will get better over time. And it is, in those calmer moments when we are in repair, where we can show our child. The kicker is belonging is a very subjective state of mind.
Right.
You don't feel that you belong consistently. We never permanently achieve that. It's something that we are constantly monitoring and evaluating, looking out for micro clues of belonging. Teenagers, especially, are trying to find that fit. Who am I? Where do I fit? Do you love me? And they're checking in with that and checking in with that all the time. Am I too much? Am I only lovable when I'm easy? And there is a really compulsive kind of need, particularly where there's been childhood trauma sometimes, to test almost to breaking point the
Right.
safety rails. What's the first thing you do when you get on a roller coaster? The thing comes down and you test it.
Right.
Um, they're doing that, and they're doing that again and again and again. What we need to think about is how to show them how much they matter and getting really good at listening to them. And that's where taking on a coaching and collaborative style as a parent, slowing down to ask them what they think first, rather than leaping in with our sort of, let me download my wisdom to you. They're not an app. They need to be able to do that emotional processing. So asking first, layering in that listening, giving them really rich experiences of being listened to, and also being able to sort of show that you champion them. Language phrases like, I saw that you, noticing little things. It's not like, yay, you scored that home run, you scored goal. It's the little things. I saw that way you helped your teammate when they'd fallen over, noticing little things. I noticed you, I heard you, I remember that I know that all those phrases that just sort of go, I see you, I hold you in mind. It's not the big stuff as much as it is the little stuff all the way along with warmth of tone. And I do think as kids grow, when babies are little, they're fat, they're toothless, they're hairless, they're everything that we don't want to be later in life, but we love them so unconditionally, and then as they grow, we expect more and we expect more and we expect more, and we can not
Expect too
always
much.
meet them where they are at. Yeah.
Expect too much. Emma,
Yeah.
we're running out of time, and I want you to be able to talk a little bit about how parents who want to dive deeper with you can work with you. Can you say a little bit about that before we end our session today?
Sure. So I have a website, which is my name, emmagleadhill.com, and I post lots of articles on lots of different themes. I also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. So on the website, at the top of every page, there is a sign up button for my newsletter. I do one-to-one coaching. As I say, I'm not a therapist, although I have a academic background in psychotherapy, and I've got a lot of know-how when it comes to positive psychology and building resilience, that I can bring to the party. I've also, as a coach, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of families over a near 30-year career, and I've seen most things. So I've kind of
Been around the block.
been around the block when it comes to really stuck and tricky situations in family life. I also do talks for schools, and of course, with the sort of digital age that we live in, I can do talks that will support educators and parent talks online as well. And perhaps if you had a small group of people in your posse who are going through a very similar thing, you might want to get in touch and organise a kind of group session with a small group of you. That might be a really nice way to process in community some of the stuff that you're going through and get a bit more bespoke take on things. I am all about trying to equip and empower people to deal with some of the really truly tricky things that our current lifestyle and lack of recovery, for instance, since the COVID years, there's been a kind of acceleration. When you talk about what is anxiety, and we actually take that down to what it is on a nervous system basis, we breathe more quickly now than we did in the 1980s or the 1930s. We're sort of breathing more shallowly, less effectively, and all of these little things. We have much less access to our default mode network because we're constantly scrolling on phones, and it's a bottomless pit of new stuff to look at. And actually, our brains, particularly the brains of growing children, need to have off time, like real downtime. And our lifestyles don't have enough of that. And in that downtime where the mind can wander freely, and this is one thing that I always think is worth looking at if anxiety is running your household, is to really look at how you can unclutter your routines and create a bit more space for downtime, because that's where we process the layers of experience. It's where empathy emerges from, slowing down in order to meet our kids where they're at,
Yes.
enabling them to have a routine that has got that structure and predictability, but really factors in a little bit more spaciousness and a little bit more ability to give ourselves grace, instead of feeling that you're failing as a parent if you're not shuttling them to X, Y, and Z. Those kind of trophy parenting notches on your belt, put those to one side for a bit and just focus on the basics, which is the quality of your relationship. And if you want to improve the quality of your relationship, just dig into listening.
So, parenting a trauma impacted teen with anxiety is not for the faint of heart, I'm hearing. And I know I'm not telling anyone listening anything they don't already know. Parents, you are not imagining it. It is as hard as it seems, but harder doesn't mean hopeless at all. So I want you to breathe in a big breath of hope and light, and remember that you are the most important person in the room for your child at any given time, whether they're a small child or a teenager. Be sure to go to patreon.com, Unmuted Love, to subscribe and download today's printables, the Teen Anxiety Cheat Sheet, and your reflective listening guide for this episode. Emma, you're the best, smartest guest. I wish we could talk longer, but we can't. Thank you so much for coming here today. It's been really lovely.
Thank you for having me. It's been really, you put me on the spot.
I didn't mean to.
No, it's been great. It's been great. Really thought-provoking questions, and I really do want to join you in honouring your listeners. And parenting is hard under any circumstances, and we're not meant to be doing it alone. That's really important to remember. So if there's just been one thing that might be for you today that will give you a little bit of help or a little bit of hope, something to try, then that really does my heart joy. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you are absolutely welcome. I think we're all enriched by listening to you talk about your perspective, which is, across the pond, but not so far that it's very different, right? It's lovely actually to talk to someone who is far away and yet still embraces some of these concepts of therapeutic parenting and how to live with children before them and to support them. All of you loyal listeners, thank you for showing up today, ready to help your teen gently embrace anxiety and, of course, to carry on. And remember, everyone, your love matters when more than love is required. I'll see you in the next episode of Unmuted Love. Thanks again, Emma. I hope to see you again soon.
Brilliant.